Yo, what is going on in the crypto market? Let's take a look. Let's find out. So I've been watching things like Bitcoin dominance, looking at what are the big movers. So we've kind of had a transition to an ETH-centered crypto market. So we're going to take a look at the ETH Bitcoin ratio, Bitcoin dominance, fear and greed index, and some other things. So starting out, we got a 4 trillion market cap, about flat from yesterday, trading volume around 173 billion. So we have had a tick up in Bitcoin dominance over the last few days. So I'm going to go ahead and get Bitcoin dominance. So we can see the time series, see a little more detail on that. So 55.3. So you can see over the last few years, we've had this big trend up in Bitcoin dominance. Looking more recently, we've appeared to make a local low, maybe starting to push up a little bit, kind of hitting this supply zone over here. So I think there could be a little bit of risk for altcoins versus Bitcoin. So that's one thing that I've kind of been tracking on my radar. So another thing we can look at is the fear greed index data set. This is going to give us a window into the sentiment of the market right now. So we can see around 43, been kind of hovering around this mid-range for a while, taking a pretty big dip in the last week or so. So people starting to feel a little nervous about the market right now, which is understandable. So we're keeping an eye on that for sure. One thing that's going to be good is just getting a sense of the overall trends. So let's just look at BTC, ETH, SOL, 50 SMA, and 200 SMA. We'll see, are we above trend, below trend? You know, we've had a pretty strong market in the last year or so. We can see the 50-day trend is now being lost. So we have this 200-day at around 103 for Bitcoin, and the 50-day is at 114. So you can see we're starting to have that short-term pressure, not actually for SOL. We've shot way above the moving averages for SOL, so that's one thing to keep in mind. So I might look at recent growth for those as well, just to see how much they're actually up in the last, yeah, those are all good. So are we up pretty big? You know, what's it looking like? It's been a bad month in general for crypto just because of the seasonality. So you can see for Bitcoin over the last month, we've essentially been flat, just chopping around. You know, we're still riding the high of the big 3-month wave that we've seen. Actually, SOL has performed decently well over the last month, surprisingly, against the others. So that's something to consider, this divergence we're seeing. So let's look at the ETH BTC ratio and SOL BTC ratio, just to see the relative moves in these assets and how they're stacking up against each other. So you can see ETH Bitcoin over the last month has been pulling back some. We're finally seeing that correction, even though over the last 200 days it's clearly been an ETH-centered market. We can see SOL Bitcoin has actually been outperforming quite a lot, even over the last month, which is interesting. Might do SOL ETH ratio too, just to see how those two are stacking up against each other, because these things tend to have rotations. Yeah, you can see over the last 50 days, it's been SOL over ETH. So pretty interesting dynamics there. So one other thing that I might want to look at here is just momentum for all of these. See, are we oversold, overbought? You know, what's the overall stance? So you can see we're at that mid-range, kind of pulling back, losing momentum. So that's one thing to keep an eye on. Another pattern I've been watching a lot is the September seasonality. So let's look at the seasonality for those, we can see things like the average return per month. So for Bitcoin, you can see this clear September lull that we get. It's typically the worst month of the year. 42% win rate, negative 3.76% return on average. So keep an eye on October to be a big month and leading into the end of the year rally. So I've been kind of more risk averse in September, looking for that end of the year Q4 rally. You can see September bad for ETH as well. Surprisingly for Sol, it's not, and it followed through on that and actually did quite well. There's only so many samples that we have, though, because the data only goes back 5 years. But that is an interesting difference. So let's just think about what's the overall picture here. So we can have a summarize. We can see what's the story. Explain this in a simple paragraph of insights. Crypto is in a cautious uptrend. Overall cap is steady while fear is elevated. Bitcoin dominance is high. Bitcoin ETH sit below their 50-day but above the 200-day, suggesting consolidation, not breakdown. Sol is the relative leader. Ratios show Sol outperforming BTC. Okay, so that confirms kind of my overall thinking right now. One other thing I might look at is volume for all those. Let's look at, are we seeing a lot of trading? Are we in a zone of liquidity? So you can see here in our volume profile that we're kind of in a bigger portion of the volume here, 15%. Down here at the 94 to 103 level, we have an even bigger block of volume. So I think there's been a lot of trading in this range. We've been consolidating at this level for a while. So pull back to around 94 to 103 to me would make sense at this point. So looking at ETH, we have a little bit less support from the volume. So 3,500 to 3,800 seems to be a logical support level if we do see a bigger correction. And then for Sol, we're kind of pushing up into lower volume areas with 165 to 190 being kind of our block, right? So in the event of bigger corrections, I could see us moving there. So keep that in mind. So what else can we look at? Okay, so let's do this. Let's look at correlation history of ETH and Bitcoin. So this is going to show us, are these assets becoming more or less similar? So over the last 50 days, the correlation has actually been dropping, meaning that ETH is diverging from Bitcoin and kind of going its own way. Let's look at that same thing for Sol Bitcoin. So Sol and Bitcoin still holding on. I mean, 0.77 is pretty high correlation, and maintaining that for the most part, except for the last couple of weeks has been a bit of a divergence. So that's interesting. So let's also look at the B bands. I like to look at Bollinger Bands, which is kind of similar to momentum. We can see, are we oversold? Are we overbought? I would guess we're probably somewhere in the middle. Yeah, so somewhere in the middle, seeing a little bit of divergence, sideways price action, but momentum pulling up. So that's something to keep an eye on. And then let's look at the ATR. So ATR is going to give us the volatility and give us some expected levels for where we might see price go. So here at around 112, if we look down, we can see our stop loss for a 2 ATR would be at 108. So I think that's not the best place to put a stop loss just because that volume cluster is there. So I'm thinking to base that as kind of a counter signal. And then 120 on the upper end would be kind of pushing back up to those all-time highs. Although I'm a little bit cautious at that at this point. So you can see the ATR for ETH is 3.86 as opposed to 1.7. So almost double the volume, or sorry, almost double the volatility. So ETH goes up a lot more, but it also comes down a lot more and has a lot bigger daily wobble. And then if we look at SOL, even higher volatility at 4.89. Looking down to about 200 for its risk. So one other thing I would like to see would be the profile 2 years for all those. So this is going to show us even more stats about the risk in the market right now. So we can see Bitcoin 2.31% Sortino. This is a number I watch a lot to see what is the quality of the returns and how smooth is the equity curve, how much upside to the amount of downside. It's like a risk reward ratio. So 2.31 for Bitcoin. ETH is still lagging in that area with bigger drawdowns. You can see it's 64% over 2 years as opposed to 28 for Bitcoin. So that's a bit of a red flag. If you look at Solana, 2.64% or 2.64 Sortino, showing that this is the cleanest, most smooth equity curve that you're going to get out of these three. And given that they're all correlated, it makes sense that you would probably lean into SOL as opposed to the other two, especially with the ratios kind of flipping like we've seen. So, but also keep in mind the higher volatility. So you just keep your position size smaller in general. All right, so let's pull this all together into a picture that we can make sense of. All right, so there's your snapshot. One other thing I want to look at that can be pretty interesting is the commitment of traders data. So look up dataset COT Ether cash settled. So that's what it's called when they report it through the CFTC. And the commitment of traders is basically showing you what are the big commercial traders in the futures market doing with these different contracts. So you can see for Ether, we have this massive pullback, and so they're selling. They're going massively short in the futures market, the big commercial traders. So I saw that, and that was definitely a bit of a red flag. So if we look at this benchmark, we can see, we'll do ETH USD. So we can see sometimes this can be a good leading indicator. When this starts to pull back consistently, you can see more sustained drawdowns in the price. And then sometimes it can even lead these bigger upside moves. So they typically buy when it's low and then sell into the strength as it goes up. So to see this kind of reaching a bottom might mean that this is reaching a top, which is kind of what we're seeing in price right now. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then also look up COT for ID Bitcoin. So we have gone net short. You can see they've been kind of unloading. Let's look at Bitcoin. So you can see they have been selling into this big strength move, and now they've actually gone short overall in the market. So that's another thing that kind of is a leading indicator that can help make sense of what's going on. So if I had to summarize, so longer term trends up, rotation into altcoins out of Bitcoin, ETH rotation into Sol over the last month, September seasonality, be cautious. And then we have upcoming end of year high probability trade. Anything else? Oh, it wants to go crazy. All right, we'll add some of those next time. So let's now just summarize key insights, create a table of stats, color coded, to present a report on this analysis and the most interesting parts. Email me that. Now let me. What is this song? All right, now. Okay, so then we're basically drafting out this email right now, and then it's going to go ahead and send me an email with all the key findings so that I can have that stored. All this music is made by AI, by the way, using Suno. Suno's pretty dope. Some people be hating on AI music, but I think it's a pretty logical next progression. All right, there we go. Email sent successfully to the user. So now I can pull that up. All right, so we got our crypto market brief. We got some key insights here of all the things we looked at. We have a total cap, kind of the big overall view. Got our table of stats here. Seeing some weakness in the shorter term. So now I have this on record. So here's what we might do now. So if I wanted to execute this as a flow, can you provide a prompt that requests all that we have talked about? So now we can get a prompt that we can upload to flows, and then we can start running this every day to get a crypto market report. Ooh. Damn, bro. Alright, well, I guess I'm just going to take this whole thing. Alright, so I'll copy that, and then I'm going to pull it over here to flows. I'm going to, I'll actually create a new flow here. So crypto daily review. I'm going to just drop this bad boy in there. Want it every day. Save it. There we go. So now I got my crypto daily review. We have this whole prompt, which is going to pull all this data, and then it'll create the report, and it will actually just drop it into your saved chats every morning. So you can see when I go to my chats, I can go to, like this one just ran this morning. So my watch list report. So I had this created for me this morning. So I have this prompt. I say, go get data on all these tickers. It runs this on the server while I'm sleeping, and then it emails it to me, and then I wake up to an email report along with the full dashboard here in my account. All right, so those are my thoughts on the crypto market, and we'll be watching it closely over the next few days. And let me know if you got any questions. Peace.